Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into a topic that honestly impacts every single interaction we have, every team we're part of, whether we realize it or not. We're talking about the fascinating, often invisible world of groups and how they truly function.
Yeah, it's fundamental stuff.
We've got a fantastic stack of sources for this deep dive. A really comprehensive unit on groups, their underlying structure, those tricky dynamics, and even how they navigate major change.
Right.
Our mission for you today is to distill the absolute essential insights from all this material, giving you a real shortcut to understanding the psychology that underpins effective teamwork and organizational success.
Yeah, hopefully some real aha moments.
Exactly. We're aiming for surprising facts and maybe just enough humor to keep things interesting.
That's precisely it. We're moving beyond just the textbook definitions to explore not just what makes a collection of people a group, but how these groups evolve.
Right.
Why certain behaviors pop up and, well, what truly makes some teams soar while others just fizzle out.
Yeah.
You're going to walk away with actionable insights, whether you're leading a sprawling project team, stepping into a new role, or, simply trying to make sense of the dynamics at play in your own family or social circles.
All right, let's unpack this then.
Okay.
So we use the word group constantly, right? Book club, corporate board, we call them all groups.
I do.
But what really elevates a mere collection of people into a true functioning group, especially when we're aiming for that magical synergy.
That's a great starting point because our sources highlight that for synergy to truly occur, that moment when the collective outcome is far greater than what any individual could achieve.
Yeah, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. A true group needs specific characteristics. It's not just about shared space. First, there has to be social interaction. Members genuinely communicate and influence each other.
Okay.
Second, they need agreed or common goals, a shared objective they're all striving for.
Makes sense.
Third, there must be a discernible group structure. This involves clear tasks, defined roles, and often unwritten rules that allow for sustained interaction. And finally, and this is crucial, there's group identity. Members acknowledge or at least perceive themselves as part of that distinct collective. Without that identity, you just have individuals occupying the same space.
So it's that interplay of interaction, shared purpose, structure, and belonging that moves us from just people in a room to a genuine group.
Precisely.
It reminds me of how a band isn't just musicians. It's when they start playing together and creating something new.
That's a perfect analogy.
It turns out groups aren't usually productive from day one. Like a fine wine, maybe. They mature over time.
They definitely do.
Our sources dive into two really popular models that explain this fascinating evolution.
And understanding these models can be a superpower for anyone managing or leading a team. It helps you proactively navigate group processes, almost like having a forecast, to accelerate performance.
Okay, let's start with a classic then. The 5-stage model of group development forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning.
Right.
Each stage, as you might imagine, comes with its own unique set of emotions, challenges, and behaviors.
Exactly. When a group is forming, there's often high uncertainty. Think of it as that awkward first day of school feeling.
Yeah.
People are figuring out the purpose, the structure, who's in charge. There's a natural dependency on the formal leader. Members are trying to determine what behaviors are acceptable. And sometimes you'll see defense mechanisms like procrastination because of that uncertainty. This stage truly completes when individuals start to genuinely think of themselves as part of the group.
So what should a manager do then?
Well, the insight here is to actively welcome members, acknowledge that initial uncertainty, maybe organize some icebreakers, and clarify the goals repeatedly. Make it safe.
Okay, got it. Then comes
Storming. This is where things can get a bit turbulent. It's characterized by intragroup conflict, resistance to group constraints, and often open disagreement over control or leadership. You might see aggression or what we call fight direct opposition,
Right.
flight withdrawing, being passive. Sometimes people form pairings where they align with others against perceived factions, like, management versus the rest of the team.
So how do you handle that?
The key for managers here is to clarify leadership roles, resolve conflicts head on, encourage diverse interaction to build understanding, and actively foster that team identity.
So conflict isn't always bad.
Not at all. The insight is Conflict is often a necessary step to clarify roles and boundaries. If you navigate storming successfully, you move into norming.
Okay, that sounds better.
This is where common expectations for behavior start to solidify, becoming either explicit rules or, more often, implicit understandings. You see close relationships form, a sense of cohesiveness, and a strong group identity with real camaraderie.
So the group starts feeling like a real unit.
Exactly. Managers in this stage should focus on discussing behavioral expectations, clarifying protocols, encouraging peer control, and rewarding desired behaviors to solidify those positive patterns.
Makes sense. And then the goal.
And then the highly coveted performing stage. Here, the group is fully functioning and truly accepting of each other. Their energy shifts almost entirely away from internal dynamics and towards task performance.
Right, getting things done.
Members interact effectively, problem solving, making decisions, executing tasks like a well-oiled machine. For permanent groups, this is the ultimate goal.
So it's not just about efficiency.
Well, the real secret to performing isn't just getting things done. It's about constantly challenging the team to innovate, even when things are running smoothly. Managers here are less directors and more like orchestrators.
Okay.
Facilitating information flow, stimulating constructive conflict, providing ongoing feedback.
And the last stage, adjourning.
Finally, for temporary groups, there's adjourning, or what's sometimes called mourning. This happens when the task is completed and the group wraps up.
Ah, right.
Members might feel a sense of pride for their accomplishments, but also maybe a twinge of sadness about the loss of camaraderie.
Yeah, I felt that.
So managers need to help wrap things up gracefully, celebrate successes, and encourage reflection on the whole journey.
So it's fascinating to hear that groups don't always follow this perfectly linear path. Like, can they ever skip stages or even, I don't know, regress?
Exactly right. Not all groups follow this perfectly. Some might have such clear goals and strong leadership that they bond quickly and effectively kind of skip some of the storming.
Okay.
Conversely, a group that's been in the performing stage for a while might hit a major roadblock or new conflict and regress back into storming as they try to redefine their approach or roles.
It's really dynamic.
It truly is a dynamic process, yeah, not a fixed recipe.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting for anyone involved in, say, long-term projects or teams. This next model, the punctuated equilibrium model, it suggests that groups don't just progress through universal sequence. Instead, they have similar experiences at specific, predictable points that literally puncture their routine and shift their direction.
It's quite insightful, this one. It highlights key moments, almost like internal alarm clocks for the group. The first meeting is surprisingly critical.
Really? The very first one?
Yeah, it often sets the group's initial direction, sometimes in a matter of seconds, establishing fundamental rules and behavioral patterns. After this, there's a period of inertia,
Correct.
where that initial direction becomes almost written in stone for the first half of the group's life. It's a phase of fixed behavior, even if those initial assumptions were a bit off.
So they just kind of chug along.
Pretty much. But what's truly crucial is the transition. This occurs exactly halfway between the first meeting and the final deadline, regardless of the project's total length.
Exactly halfway. That's specific.
It is remarkably consistent. Think of it like a mid-project wake-up call, suddenly heightening awareness of limited time. This transition marks a concentrated burst of changes. Old patterns are dropped, new perspectives adopted, a revised direction for the second phase is set.
A real shakeup.
A real shakeup. After that, there is a second phase of inertia where the group executes plans from the transition period. Finally, the last meeting is characterized by a final burst of activity to finish the work and meet the deadline.
Can you paint a picture of this in action? Like, give us a concrete example.
Certainly. Imagine a project team with a tight 9-week deadline, maybe working remotely.
Okay.
In their first online meeting, they establish a basic timetable, discuss initial requirements. For the first 4 or 5 weeks, they meet regularly, sticking to that original plan, that's the inertia.
Right.
Then, precisely around week 5, the midpoint, something shifts. Suddenly, problems that were ignored are confronted, discussions become more open, maybe more aggressive, and the group makes necessary changes to their approach.
The transition.
The transition. And if they make the right changes, they're able to produce a first-rate project in the remaining time during that second phase of inertia, culminating with a final burst of activity at the last meeting just before the deadline.
So for anyone leading a group or managing a project, what's the actionable takeaway from this midpoint crisis model?
Well, it profoundly emphasizes the importance of setting a clear, realistic direction right from the absolute beginning.
Okay.
But maybe even more critically, it highlights the need for purposeful monitoring systems. You need to be ready to check progress and proactively deal with deviations, especially around that crucial midpoint transition.
That's your window.
That's your chance to course correct before it's too late.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so beyond how groups develop, they also possess a sort of invisible scaffolding. You mentioned structure earlier, a clear structure that really shapes member behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding this helps us explain and even predict how individuals and the group as a whole will act.
Right. You're absolutely right. These structural variables are critical for understanding how groups truly function, beyond just the personalities involved. First up is leadership. A leader fundamentally mobilizes group efforts toward common goals.
Okay.
Now, what's truly fascinating here, and it's a more modern take, is that it's not always the formally designated person.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, industrial organizational psychologists, those who study work behavior, have observed that any group member who can best serve the group's leadership needs at a given time can actually emerge as a leader.
That's a powerful shift from the traditional top-down view of just, centralized power.
It really is.
So the formal leader's role becomes more about cultivating an environment where others can step up.
Precisely. A formal leader should create a climate where members feel empowered to assume leadership based on their knowledge, their skills, the task at hand, or even the emotional needs of the group in that moment.
Uh-huh.
Our sources even highlight this nuanced approach by contrasting, say, Eurocentric leadership, which tends to be more directive, with Afrocentric leadership, which is rooted in the principle of Ubuntu emphasizing humanity, respect, collaboration, consensus. It fosters a more inclusive, shared approach, like you see in some South African organizations.
So it's about distributing influence, not hoarding it.
Exactly. Well put.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So moving from leadership, what about the specific roles people play in groups, and how do those expectations end up affecting them?
Right, roles. A role is essentially a set of expected behavior patterns for a given position, and we all juggle many roles simultaneously: employee, parent, friend, volunteer.
Yeah, tell me about it.
And this can often lead to conflict when those roles demand different behaviors.
Okay, so what kind of roles are there?
Roles can broadly be categorized. You have task-oriented roles, which facilitate decision-making, like someone who initiates ideas or seeks information or evaluates solutions.
Mhm.
Then there are relations-oriented roles, which encourage group morale, like an encourager or a gatekeeper who ensures everyone gets a chance to speak, a follower.
Okay, the social glue?
Sort of, yeah. And unfortunately, there are also self-oriented roles which serve individual needs at the expense of the group. Think of the blocker, the dominator, the avoider.
Ah, yeah, we've all seen those.
We have. And within these, we can delve deeper. Your role identity is when you display attitudes and behaviors consistent with a role like that teacher who genuinely loves teaching. It's part of who they are.
Right.
Role perception is your individual view of how you should act. So one union rep might see their role as challenging management, another sees it as fostering collaboration. Same role, different perception.
Right.
Role expectation is how others believe you should act. A PR manager acts professionally at work, but at home, their kids expect love and attention. Different expectations.
Wow.
When these expectations become generalized, they can form role stereotypes. And underpinning all this is the psychological contract, that unwritten agreement of expectations between employees and employers.
And problems happen when those aren't met.
Exactly. Problems often arise when these unspoken expectations aren't met, which often leads to role conflict.
Right, the clash.
Precisely. It's when an individual faces divergent or contradictory role expectations. The example you gave, student, job, family gathering, all on the same day, that's a clash, and it ties directly into the broader challenge of work-life integration.
This is something so many of our listeners probably experience daily, and it feels even more pronounced now with remote work.
Oh, definitely.
Our sources provide a great example here, specifically related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
They do, and it's a powerful illustration. The rapid shift to remote work during the pandemic led to increased anxiety and stress for countless employees.
I bet.
Many developed a role perception of needing to be constantly available, feeling perpetually connected to work.
Right, the always-on culture.
Exactly. This created intense role conflict for working parents especially, who were suddenly torn between their task roles at work and the immediate needs of their families, like homeschooling.
Yeah, that was tough.
Leaders had to step up by agreeing on KPIs, offering support like admin assistance, providing structured feedback, acknowledging these new pressures, and crucially, it also meant agreeing on new norms,
Ah, norms again.
like response times, and actively respecting private time to prevent burnout and foster a healthier balance.
That example clearly shows how these structural elements are interconnected. It raises an important question. How do roles and other structural elements tie into another crucial aspect, norms?
Right, norms. Norms are the agreed upon standards of behavior shared by group members. They're often informally established, rarely written down, and unique to each group. Think of them as the unspoken rules of engagement.
Okay, so what kinds of these unwritten rules, these norms, are typical in work groups?
You'll find a few common categories. There are performance-related norms, which are implicit cues about how hard to work, directly affecting individual outcome. Should I slow down? Should I speed up to match the group?
Right, peer pressure, almost.
In a way, yes. Then you have appearance-related norms, covering everything from dress code to general image, like who works overtime, who's expected to be super organized. Think factory workers wearing protective gear or sales agents in branded clothing.
Oh,
Social arrangement norms dictate interaction. Is it okay to have lunch together but not socialize outside work? Who sits where in meetings? In diverse contexts, this includes cultural nuances like showing respect to elders or avoiding eye contact.
that's interesting.
Our sources actually suggest that a simple 20 to 30-minute chat for teams to discuss these preferences can prevent a world of misunderstandings.
Good tip.
And finally, there are allocation of resources norms, the unspoken rules for things like pay, who gets the tough assignments, or how equipment is distributed.
So why are these informal rules, these norms, so profoundly important?
They're absolutely crucial. For one, they're vital for group survival, ensuring a certain uniformity and common approach that fosters collaboration. They also provide predictability, so members know what to expect from each other. They help reduce embarrassment by guiding appropriate behavior. And maybe most importantly, they express a group's central values.
How so?
Well, whether the norm is unwavering commitment to customer care or a preference for efficient tech solutions, it shows what the group truly prioritizes.
Gotcha. So how do these powerful, often unwritten norms even develop in the first place?
Most norms develop in a few key ways. They can emerge through direct statements by a member or leader.
Okay.
They might crystallize from critical events in the group's history, like that new security rule after a data leak example.
Right.
They can also come from primacy events, simply following old habits established early on. Sometimes they're carryover behaviors from past situations people bring into a new group.
Hmm.
And increasingly, they're intentionally shaped through purposeful team-building sessions where norms are consciously identified and agreed upon.
Okay, next up. Status. It's a massive motivator, right? But it can also be a huge source of dissatisfaction. What does status truly look like within groups?
Right, status. It's essentially a socially defined position or rank given to groups or individual members by others. It can be formal status, which is overtly awarded through titles, perks like a big office, higher pay, fringe benefits.
The visible stuff.
Exactly. Or it can be informal status, which is more subtle, based on personal attributes like education, age, gender, skill, or sheer experience.
Okay.
Now, status equity is the belief that these differences are actually fair and justified. When there's perceived inequity or unfairness, that's when you see dissatisfaction erupt, and it can quickly spiral into unhealthy negative competition.
Yeah, that can be toxic.
It can. And while status can indicate expertise and be a motivator, putting too much emphasis on it can actually block crucial information sharing and collaboration.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that in modern organizations focusing on teamwork, status differences are often de-emphasized. High performance itself is becoming the main contributor to status.
So, tell me, does size really matter when it comes to a group's effectiveness? Group size.
Absolutely, it does. Research clearly shows that smaller groups, ideally around 7 members, are typically faster at completing tasks and much better at taking decisive action.
Okay, 7 is the magic number.
Often cited, yeah. Larger groups, say 12 or more members, really shine when you need diverse input and extensive fact-finding.
Right. More brain power.
Exactly. And here's a practical tip. Having an odd number of members is always desirable when voting is required, just to prevent ties.
Good point. And what about the downsides of larger groups? Any negatives?
One significant negative we often see is social loafing.
Ah, social loafing. the slackers?
Well, it's the tendency for individual group members to exert less effort than they're capable of doing individually because they rely on the group as a whole to take responsibility.
Right, thinking someone else will pick it up.
Precisely. To overcome social loafing, it's crucial for groups to not only emphasize the shared goal, but also to explicitly clarify and define individual responsibilities right from the start during that forming stage.
Got it. Accountability. Now, group diversity. We hear so much about it today. How does it truly impact the dynamics and effectiveness of groups?
Group diversity refers to the similarities and differences among members. This can be observable like gender, race, age, what we call surface level diversity,
Okay.
or it can be deep level diversity, which is unobservable, encompassing things like thinking style, life story, unique skills.
Right, the stuff underneath.
Exactly. Now, heterogeneous groups, composed of dissimilar individuals, are generally far more creative and effective
Why is that?
because they bring a wider range of abilities and information to the table. However, this richness can also lead to more conflict initially.
Makes sense.
In contrast, homogeneous groups, made up of similar individuals, often have less conflict but also less innovative thought. A really interesting concept is relational demography, how a single person differs from others in the group, like the only female or the only person for marketing. This can be daunting and affects inclusivity.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And of course, cultural diversity is crucial. Culture values, beliefs, customs profoundly influences behavior, like collectivism versus individualism. Differences can unfortunately lead to stereotyping, prejudice, ethnocentrism, which severely damage trust.
So, with all those potential challenges, what does genuinely good diversity management actually look like in a group setting?
It really involves proactively creating an inclusive climate where all members truly feel valued and believe they're making a meaningful contribution.
Okay.
This means consciously establishing trust, fostering constructive relations, building shared values. It also requires providing equitable opportunities for collaboration, shared decision-making, networking, and creativity to ultimately boost quality, productivity, and efficiency.
This is about leveraging those differences, not just tolerating them.
Exactly, leveraging them for a better outcome.
Okay, we've talked about the structure, the skeleton of a group. But how do groups actually interact? What's going on beneath the surface? That pulsing heartbeat.
Right, that's where group processes come in. These refer to the dynamic interactions between members' communication, decision-making, leadership behavior, power dynamics, conflict.
All that messy human stuff.
Pretty much. These processes are the engine of the group. They can either powerfully enhance performance or significantly hinder it. Open communication fuels creativity, social loafing drains productivity, and within these processes we have group dynamics, the continuous behavioral forces that profoundly influence a group's effectiveness and how members identify with it.
This sounds like those unseen forces at play, the subtle currents beneath the surface. What are some key examples that IO psychologists often observe?
That's right. They're often subtle but powerful. One is dependency. That's when a group, maybe feeling anxious about a tough task, expects the leader to just take charge.
Right, tell us what to do.
Exactly. And if the leader doesn't, that frustration can morph into counterdependency, where the group actively ignores or resists the leader. The ideal, of course, is interdependency and collaboration.
Okay.
We also observe fight or flight versus engagement. Members might rebel against the leader or task, fight, or withdraw and procrastinate flight. The goal is to shift them toward active engagement. Then there's pairing and splitting. That's where members try to align with perceived, powerful individuals, which can unfortunately lead to divisive us versus them thinking, which is terrible for collaboration.
Yeah, cliques forming.
Right. Meanness is when individuals emotionally or cognitively distance themselves to maintain individual freedom, which can hurt cohesion. Conversely, we-ness is when members prioritize unity above all else.
That sounds ecto.
It promotes collaboration, but extreme we-ness can dangerously lead to groupthink and unwillingness to debate openly for fear of disrupting harmony.
Okay. The downside of too much agreement. So, becoming aware of these under-the-radar social processes is really the key.
It is. It's key to fostering genuine group growth and effectiveness. Spotting the symptoms, knowing how to respond.
We mentioned cohesion earlier. What exactly makes a group cohesive, and why is it so powerful?
Right, group cohesion. It's the degree to which members are attracted to each other and motivated to stay in the group. Highly cohesive groups are generally more effective.
Okay.
But here's the critical nuance. Only if they also adhere to high-performance-related norms.
Ah, there are those norms again.
They keep coming back. If a highly cohesive group has low performance norms, they'll be very happy together, but spectacularly unproductive.
Right. Happy but going nowhere.
Exactly. Several factors influence this cohesion. Time spent together is a big one. More productive time increases bonding, though this is harder for virtual teams.
Sure.
The exclusivity of the group plays a role. The harder it is to get in, the prouder members are, the more cohesive they become.
Makes sense.
Group size matters too. Larger groups tend to foster more cliques, decreasing overall cohesion. Member orientation towards cooperation over internal competition leads to stronger bonding.
Okay.
External threats almost universally increase interaction and bonding, rallying the troops. And finally, previous successes build positive spirit that attracts new members and reinforces bonds.
That's a critical insight. So cohesion plus high performance norms equals high productivity. But high cohesion and low norms,
Yes.
low productivity.
Precisely. It's not just about liking each other. It's about liking each other and being committed to excellence together.
Okay, group communication.
Yeah.
The lifeblood of any group, right? What are some common pitfalls?
Communication at its core is exchanging information and meaning, but breakdowns often result from two main issues. First, filtering,
Filtering.
where the sender intentionally leaves out parts of the message, maybe only transmitting what they think is important, can lead to incomplete understanding.
Right.
Second, distortion, where the message is rephrased or interpreted differently, changing its original meaning. In large groups, communication can also fail simply due to less participation and a few dominant voices. Misunderstanding can also arise from physical barriers like noise, sheer information overload, or the receiver's psychological state.
So feedback is crucial.
Absolutely vital.
Yep.
It's your only way to ensure the message was truly understood and accepted.
And how has modern technology fundamentally impacted this?
Well, while tech has undeniably made contact easier and faster, it's introduced new challenges. Communication overload is a big one.
Definitely feel that.
And, ironically, even poorer work-life integration because we feel we have to be always on.
Right.
Crucially, sensitive issues and conflicts are almost always better handled face-to-face.
Mm.
People tend to be less inhibited, maybe take more risks when using electronic communication,
Yeah, keyboard warriors.
which can quickly escalate misunderstandings or lead to regrettable statements that wouldn't happen in person.
Good point. Okay, let's tackle some deeper forces. Influence, power, and organizational politics. How do these play out?
These are huge. Power is often about legitimate, formal authority, but influence is more subtle. The ability to change perceptions, attitudes, or behavior even without formal power.
How do you get influence then?
You gain influence through things like openly sharing information, strategic networking, forming coalitions, even sincerely complimenting others. Now, organizational politics, that often refers to self-soothing behaviors not officially endorsed by the organization.
The dark side.
Often, yeah. These can lead to negative consequences like bias, uncertainty, unequal resource distribution, rewards based on dubious criteria.
So political skill sounds like maybe a positive application of influence, using it for good.
Exactly. Political skill is about effectively understanding others at work and strategically using that knowledge to influence towards both personal and organizational goals. It has 4 key dimensions. Social astuteness, accurately reading social situations.
Okay.
Interpersonal influence, networking ability, building broad, useful connections, and apparent sincerity, being seen as honest, no hidden motives. It's important for leaders and members to observe how power and influence are used and whether they genuinely serve the group's interests. Influence is truly a double-edged sword.
How so?
It can be positive, like promoting yourself for career development, or incredibly like bribery, nepotism, sexual harassment.
Okay, now conflict feels almost inevitable in groups, doesn't it? You said earlier it's not always bad.
Correct. Conflict arises from differing goals or disagreements on how to achieve them. It can absolutely be a good thing if managed correctly, leading to stronger solutions, deeper understanding.
Where does it usually come from?
Sources are varied. The organizational context itself, task interdependence, misaligned reward structures, competition for scarce resources, and crucially, communication obstacles. Communication breakdowns are a major source. Conflict is actually less likely if team members are collectively responsible for goal attainment and rewarded collectively. That encourages unity.
And what about team altruism? That sounds like a really powerful, positive concept.
It is. Team altruism is pro-social behavior, where members voluntarily make interdependent actions that benefit others, often involving personal sacrifice, going above and beyond formal expectations.
Wow. How do you encourage that?
Leaders can powerfully encourage this by being role models themselves, showing genuine care and empathy. It's particularly effective to foster this during the forming and storming stages. Once established, it becomes a powerfully reinforcing team norm, creates a culture of mutual support.
That sounds great. Okay, trust. Feels like the absolute bedrock, doesn't it? Without it, everything else just crumbles.
It's utterly vital. Trust is a psychological state, a willingness to be vulnerable because you have positive expectations of others' actions. It develops over time, influenced by past experiences, roles, relationships.
And when it exists,
When trust exists, people are far more willing to share information openly, collaborate freely, take risks together. It unlocks potential.
what makes people trust others?
Trust develops when people are consistently perceived as competent, having the necessary skills, possessing integrity, acting with openness, honesty, fairness, demonstrating consistency, being reliable, predictable, showing good judgment, exhibiting loyalty, willingness to protect and save face for someone, and having openness, willingness to share ideas and info freely.
And ethics.
Ethics, the study of moral values, is inseparable from trust. Unethical behavior profoundly harms individuals, teams, organizations, damages reputation. Ethical decision-making requires identifying issues, seeking different opinions, making and defending decisions even with incomplete information.
Right. Okay, let's shift to group decision-making. Many big organizational decisions are made by groups.
Right.
What are the pros and cons?
Well, the pros are clear. Groups have collective resources, bringing more input, more diverse alternatives. This often leads to increased acceptance of solutions because members participated.
Buy-in.
Exactly, buy-in. And it lends greater legitimacy, perceived as more democratic.
But the downsides?
Clear disadvantages, too. Group decisions can be notoriously time-consuming. There are often subtle pressures to conform, potential for a few dominant members to hijack the discussion, and crucially, ambiguous responsibility, diffused accountability.
Those sound like serious challenges. What exactly are groupthink and group shift? They sound like decision-making diseases.
They kind of are. They're insidious byproducts that hinder objective appraisal and quality decisions. Groupthink occurs when group pressures for conformity become so strong they deter critical appraisal of unusual, alternative, minority, or unpopular views.
How do you spot it?
You'll see it when members rationalize away resistance, apply direct pressure on doubters self-censor, and there's an illusion of unanimity. Groups act invulnerable, like they can't make a mistake, often influenced by high cohesion, leader behavior, isolation from outsiders.
Okay, scary. And group shift.
Group shift, a special case of groupthink, happens when individual members exaggerate their initial positions after discussion. It's fascinating. Cautious people become more cautious. Aggressive people take riskier positions.
Why does that happen?
Could be members becoming more comfortable and bold, risk-taking seen as desirable, or shared responsibility making individuals feel less accountable for a risky outcome. The final decision reflects the dominant opinion, amplified.
So given these tricky pitfalls, how can groups actually avoid them and make better decisions? Any techniques?
Yes, definitely. Our sources offer several powerful techniques. Brainstorming is a classic. Generate tons of ideas without criticism, encouraging creative alternatives.
Right, no bad ideas initially.
Exactly. The nominal group technique is different. Members work independently, first list ideas, rank them, then communicate through a leader. Prevents dominance, promotes individual input.
Yep.
The Delphi technique is similar, but remote members never meet face-to-face, often used by international specialists to reach consensus via structured, anonymous input rounds.
Interesting.
A SWOT analysis is great for strategy, evaluating internal strength weaknesses, external opportunities threats, guides decisions by asking targeted questions.
We use that sometimes.
Very useful. Online decision-making leverages tech for large group input. Anonymity, honesty, speed are major advantages. Typing responses, real-time aggregate votes.
Okay. Any others?
A few more mention. Focus groups, selected people give feedback on goods, services, ideas, common in marketing. The devil's advocate technique, two groups criticize each other's ideas to strengthen solutions. And the expert systems technique uses tech and human resources to foster innovation. Key is choosing the right tool.
All right, we've drilled down into individual teams, but What happens when you zoom out? How do all these groups form the bigger picture, the unique personality, the DNA of an entire organization? That's organizational culture, right?
Exactly. Organizational culture is that interdependent set of beliefs, values, behavioral tendencies, and tools that become common and self-maintaining over time. It's what truly distinguishes one organization from another.
So it's the vibe, the feel.
It includes both observable characteristics, dress code, myths, jargon, distinct behaviors, and the unobservable characteristics like shared values, norms, beliefs, underlying assumptions. It acts as an invisible guide for employees.
Tells you how things are really done.
Precisely. Acceptable behaviors, rewards, decision-making. It's the air you breathe in an organization.
So where does this powerful, invisible culture actually come from? How's it formed?
It's shaped by several key forces. First, the organization's founders. Their initial philosophy sets the tone. Traditional founder, maybe a rigid hierarchy, entrepreneurial, maybe informal, innovative.
Right, the origin story matters.
Immensely. Second, management, especially senior leadership, their actions, words, articulation of vision and values are huge. Employees then reinforce the culture by acting as required. And third, the very nature of the organization itself. A cutting-edge tech firm will inherently develop a different culture than, say, a traditional furniture maker.
Makes sense. So once this culture exists, how do new employees get integrated? What's that journey like? Organizational socialization.
Exactly. Organizational socialization is the process where new employees are exposed to the values, beliefs, customs, molding them into the culture. Onboarding is a key part, aiming for rapid adjustment and performance.
How does it work? Are there stages?
Typically 3 stages. First, anticipatory socialization, the pre-arrival stage. Before joining, you research, form expectations, looking up a company's reputation. Organizations use careful recruitment to provide a realistic preview here.
Managing expectation.
Right. Then the encounter stage, the actual experience of joining. You see the organization for what it truly is, develop relationships, learn the ropes. If this goes badly, people might leave quickly.
So the first few weeks are critical.
Very critical. Organizations counter this with orientation, training, challenging tasks, supportive supervisors. The final stage is adjustment. Individuals work to meet group expectations, act according to values, integrate work and personal life. It's complete when they internalize values, gain confidence, become role models.
This is incredibly relevant today, especially with remote work. Our sources highlighted that, didn't they?
Yes, they did. A really important point. IO psychologists and HR folks need to carefully consider socialization for new remote hires. It's so easy for them to feel neglected, isolated.
How so?
They might not pick up on jargon, might feel like existing employees already bonded into cliques they can't access. So using communication platforms effectively, clearly defining the role of existing team members and supporting socialization becomes crucial to truly integrate them, even remotely.
Makes sense. Okay, last big topic. Social change in organizations. Organizations are living systems constantly adapting. What drives this?
They absolutely are. They must adapt to a relentlessly changing environment. On the outside, external forces like globalization, workforce diversity, rapid tech change, Industry 4.0, calls for ethical behavior.
Big forces.
Huge. Internally, internal sources demand increased efficiency, effectiveness, and employee satisfaction. There's also growing pressure to shift from purely economic views to more humanistic ones, respecting potential, creativity, fostering cooperation for noble goals.
So change is planned.
Organizational change, when done well, is a planned, systematic process.
But change is hard, right? People resist. How do organizations manage this?
That's where Kurt Lewin's classic 3-stage model for managing change is invaluable. First stage, unfreezing.
Unfreezing.
Management recognizes and communicates the urgent need for change, prepares the organization mentally. Identify and deal with resistance by discussing reasons, creating a new vision, analyzing the gap between now and the future.
Okay, preparing the ground.
Exactly. Second stage, movement. This is where actual changes happen. Strategies developed and implemented, flattening structure, introducing new teams, restilling training, the period of action.
Got it.
Finally, refreezing. New performance levels and behaviors are reinforced until habitual. Locking in the change through regular progress measurement, celebrating milestones, rewarding new behaviors.
This process really highlights the importance of change agents, doesn't it? Internal or external?
Absolutely. A good change agent doesn't just dictate solutions. They help the organization understand its current state and desired future. They manage a well-planned, collaborative process, acting as facilitators.
So they teach the organization to fish. Kind of.
In a way, yeah. They can teach members vital skills like better communication, problem solving, goal setting, empowering the organization to adapt itself.
Our sources gave a scenario for this. Flattening structure, multifunctional teams, reskilling.
Perfect example. It would involve all three stages: unfreezing, communicating why the old way isn't working, the vision for the new teams, movement, implementing the structure, forming teams, providing training, refreezing, reinforcing collaboration, embedding it in reviews, celebrating successes until it's the norm.
And there are different types of interventions.
Right. Change interventions can aim for three types of social development: individual development, empowerment, skills training, career planning, wellness strategies encouraging accountability, creativity, team development, identifying and solving team problems like poor communication or conflict, helping teams set goals, and organizational development, changing leadership approaches or the overall culture.
How do you choose?
Choice depends on the diagnosed problems. Often, you need a combination of interventions for deep, lasting change.
So after this incredible journey through the intricate world of groups, what does all this mean for managers and really for all of us navigating our own teams?
Yeah, the bottom line is that teams are truly the fundamental building blocks for collaboration, knowledge sharing, high performance. For managers, your role is absolutely crucial.
How so?
You have to foster environments where teams can genuinely grow, develop maturity, become high performing. This means being an architect of structure, creating conditions that foster identity and leverage diversity,
Okay.
ensuring every member fulfills meaningful roles, experiences achieve status, acting as a perceptive group facilitator, deeply aware of those hidden dynamics to foster effective relationships, communication, decision-making, and, critically, being courageous enough to change the social system if the conditions for effective teams simply don't exist.
Wow. It sounds like it's about being an architect, a guide, and sometimes, yeah, even a bit of a therapist for the group.
That's not a bad way to put it, actually.
We've taken a fascinating deep dive today into the world of groups, from their foundational characteristics to their complex, often non-linear development, the invisible structures shaping them, and the dynamic processes that determine success or failure. We've explored how they make decisions, build culture, and adapt to change in a constantly shifting landscape.
And we've seen that understanding these underlying mechanisms isn't just academic theory, it's profoundly practical. It's essential for anyone who wants to foster genuine synergy, navigate inevitable conflict constructively,
Right.
build unshakable trust, and ultimately contribute to a more effective and, dare I say, more humane collective.
So next time you're in a team meeting, or just observing a new group forming around you, maybe pause for a moment. Consider what stage they might be in. Are you seeing subtle signs of storming?
Yeah.
Is there a midpoint transition on the horizon for your next big project? What unspoken norms are implicitly at play, and how might they be subtly influencing decisions or behaviors?
It changes how you see things.
For you, the learner, the biggest takeaway from all of this might just be this. Knowing the theory of group dynamics is one thing, but how might actively observing these principles in your own daily interactions, really listening, watching, understanding, truly change your approach to collaboration and leadership?
That's the real question to ponder.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked some powerful aha moments and left you feeling genuinely well-informed and ready to apply this knowledge.